Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick Llewellyn coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Sunny Las Vegas, Nevada, that is. Our guest today is Stephen Frye. He's a candidate for United States Senate in 2012. Before we get started, I would like to recognize and say a happy birthday to all of our Marine Corps veterans and all of the Marines serving right now on active duty. And also I want to say a special thanks to all of our veterans, our active duty, and all their families for the service and sacrifices in recognition of Veterans Day. We really appreciate all your service. And real quick, Steve Sanson had a medical situation, not for him, but one of his loved ones, and he felt it was imperative that he was present. And Jim Jonas is on assignment today, so I'll be filling in. We have a very, very interesting guest today, Mr. Stephen Frye. I think that this is going to be a very enlightening and entertaining show today. Mr. Frye, introduce yourself, please.
It's going to be a great show. My name is Dr. Stephen Frye. I'm a physician and a psychiatrist, and I have written a book called We Really Lost This War, subtitled 25 Reasons to Legalize Drugs. Each of the 25 chapters is by its standalone documented reason to legalize. You put it all together, it's overwhelming. I'm not a drug use advocate. I'm a proponent of minimal drug use, and therefore when you legalize, drug use goes down. Everybody keeps telling you drug use goes up if you legalize. It doesn't go up. We've got 3 different countries that are proving it. But, you know, the United States politicians still get elected by being tough on drugs and building prisons and putting people away, and it all leads to more drug use, not less drug use, and I'll explain that. So I'm not a proponent of drug use. Legalization means regulation and taxation and control. It does not mean availability in every convenience store and vending machine. It's the way we regulate alcohol. And the Netherlands has 35 years of success. Portugal now has 6 years of success. And Switzerland has incredible success with giving free heroin and free needles to hardcore methadone-resistant heroin addicts, and the use goes way, way, way down.
So Portugal and Switzerland have also joined that boat with the Netherlands.
That is correct.
Yeah, you know, I have been to Amsterdam more than once.
Good, me too.
I was assigned in West Germany at the time. This was still during the Cold War. I did make it over to Amsterdam, and I found it very interesting. I personally don't use those products, but I kind of have a position of maybe not full legalization, but decriminalization. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at some of your table of contents here on your chapters for your 25 reasons, mm-hmm. and I got to say I can't really argue with a lot of them.
Well, that's what happens when people listen to me. They're convinced. They start out saying, "Oh, we got to build more prison, lock up more people." Well, then when they start to listen to the facts, they come around to say, "You know, this guy makes sense." The problem is not the drugs, Patrick. The problem is the drug dealer. If your kids or your grandchildren get hooked on drugs, it's not going to ever be because you suggested that was a good thing to do. It's going to be because some drug dealer sampled them, got them hooked, and that's the problem. And then once they get them hooked, it's a pyramid scheme. They got to get other people hooked to support their habit.
Sure.
So when you eliminate the dealer, that problem goes away. We have to agree that we're never going to get to zero. And the proof of that is the United States now has 70 years of prohibition, and we have 5% of the world's 5% of the world's population. So if we were having success, we'd have only 3 or 4% of the world's drug use, right? We don't. We don't have 10%. We don't have 25%. The United States use 60% of the world's drug use, and it's because of our drug war, and I'll be glad to explain that.
Is it 60%?
It's 60% of the world's drugs use that we use in this country.
And a lot of that, I guess what people don't understand is a lot of that money goes to fund the cartels in Mexico,
absolutely,
Colombia, other South American countries,
and furthermore,
even some terrorists.
That's the critical point. Not even some terrorists. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, on 9/11, their budget was $31 million. Now, as a result of their you're going to learn a lot of things today, Patrick. And now, as a result of our drug war. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda control the Afghan drug and poppy trade. They now have $500 million a year. So the United States is now a major supporter financially of the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. So our politicians are, well, we're fighting terrorism. Excuse me? We're funding it.
Well, we're participating in a global drug distribution.
We're the major users. If we're using 60%, we're the major funders of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban.
Now, in that region of the world, it's the opium trade.
Correct.
And this is not a new market for that. I mean, this has been going on. I mean, the ancient Chinese were bringing in opium from that part of the world.
Right.
This is nothing new. What maybe a lot of Americans don't understand is it's a business to incarcerate, prosecute, incarcerate. I mean, this keeps a lot of people employed.
We have more people in prison in the United States than any other country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
China has 4.5 times our population. We have more people in prison, but we criticize them for human rights violations.
Sure.
The majority of people that we have in prison for drug offenses are simple marijuana possession, 87%. These are not the cartel leaders. These are not the kingpins. They're simply smoking some pot. What happens? We put them in prison. They're now come out with a felony record. The only job they can get is dealing drugs. Crime. That's how our drug war has created. There's 2 ways our drug war has created our drug epidemic. Number one is by putting people in prison, where number one, prison is career college for criminals.
Sure.
And by the way, if we can't keep 1 million illegal immigrants out of the country every year, and we can't even keep drugs out of prisons, please tell me how we're ever going to keep drugs off the street.
Well, we have over 2 million people in prison in the United States.
It's 1%. I thought it was 1 million. It may be 2 million. I don't know the exact figures.
The last I heard it was 2 million.
Could be.
A friend of mine I served with in the Army.
It's closer to 3 million because it's 1%.
He told me he's a black man from Florida. He told me there's over 1 million black men in prison.
Yes. The war on drugs is the most racist issue in the United States today. Whites do the drugs 87%. Blacks do the time 74%. You go into any prison that's filled with minorities. Why? The cops don't go looking in Wall Street and the Sears Tower for drug abusers. They go to the ghettos. And by the way, did you see any ghettos when you were in Amsterdam?
I did not.
You know why you didn't see any? You didn't see any because there aren't any. When you eliminate the drug problem, you do a lot to eliminate ghettos. Business come in, they invest, drive-by shootings go dramatically down, if not gone. So when you clean up the drug trade by legalization, ghettos get much safer, and drug use goes down dramatically.
Well, some of the peripheral businesses of the drug trade are arms.
Sure.
The violence, the incarceration.
Absolutely.
It keeps our local cops busy, keeps the district attorney's office.
We waste, it's a $100 billion a year fiasco. We accomplish, the only thing that has ever reduced drug use and drug demand is treatment. The first thing a guy does when he gets into prison is try to score some drugs, and he can do it. The first thing a guy does when he gets out of prison is start to sell and use drugs again. There's no evidence of any rehabilitation or education in prison. It doesn't happen. The prisons are overcrowded, they're underfunded, so nothing happens except warehousing our good people that were good people. What happens is when you put somebody in prison, you convert a tax-paying citizen into an ex-felon lifetime problem. And there's 2 reasons we have the highest drug use in the world. One is the drug war and putting in prisons, because when they come out, they become drug dealers. And the second, they just reversed this past year, was the Rockefeller laws in New York. 30 years, the Rockefeller laws said anybody that's involved in a drug transaction aged 18 or over is going to get a minimum 5-year sentence. Well, this was hoorah day for the drug cartels. What did they do? They got the 16 and 17-year-olds involved, opened up a whole new market. But don't forget, we're told that we wage this war to protect our children. That's why we wage the war on drugs, to protect our children and teenagers. The truth is the war on drugs is a catastrophe for children and teenagers.
Just last week, one of the questions on the California ballot was for the legalization of marijuana.
Correct.
Now, California had they had a relatively large turnout for a midterm election.
Right.
Of course, Hispanic population being probably 30% of California's population, roughly.
Yes.
What I heard was a lot of them were informed by their Mexican or Colombian friends, associates, family, whatever, not to vote for this, for the legalization question.
Why?
Or to vote no.
Why?
Well, from my understanding, if it's legalized,
Yeah.
now the Mexican cartels, the other Central American countries, I'm not picking on Mexico, I'm half myself.
Okay.
But the Colombians also, they don't want it legalized in the United States.
Of course not.
And
They make billions
and
with a B.
With the B. The DEA, I've known a few people in
They don't want it legalized. That's job security for them.
I've known a few people in special forces that had some interaction with the DEA. They were pretty much used as affiliates for them, but it's not on what's presented on the local and the national news media is not the reality behind the scenes on the drug trade.
The drug war, as I have documented with 342 citations in the back of my book, everything that I say is documented with a reference to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the American Medical Association, the London Guardian. There's not one reference in there from the National Enquirer. They're all legitimate, solid references that document the total failure of this drug war, and we can never win it. It's a political lie to say we are winning and to say we can win. If a drug cartel leader is killed, it's a front-page story. Does that mean the cartel goes out of business? Absolutely not. Montgomery Ward went out of business. Eastern Airlines went out of business. Drug cartels never go out of business. It just means there's a gunfight to see who the new leader is. That's all it means. And they pick up 30 tons of marijuana in a tunnel between Mexico and the United States. Front page story, we're winning the war on drugs, we got 30 tons. That's just a fraction of a percent. All that shows is how little they're getting compared to what keeps coming in. The problem keeps growing. We can never win. Killing a drug dealer, a drug cartel king, accomplishes nothing except to make it look like we're winning. Scoring on the front page of the paper that the police or the DEA got some cocaine or some marijuana means nothing. The amounts keep going up. We can never keep it out of this country. They've tried everything. They always find another way to get in. The latest thing is they're bringing it in by submarine. The cartels have their own submarine now.
You're kidding.
No, a couple of months ago from Mexico.
Who did they purchase submarines from? Probably.
I didn't ask who they purchased it from. My point is, when you've got billions of dollars, you get the latest aircraft, you get the latest helicopters. Whatever we've ever put up, they've gone around. They will continue to go around. They got tunnels for years now going from between Mexico and the United States. They just walk it right under, which, by the way, weakens us in terms of national security, because if a terrorist pays a drug dealer X amount of money to bring a bomb or something else, a drug dealer is not an ethical person. He's not going to say, oh, no, I can't transport terrorists and bombs. I can just take in cocaine and heroin. Please. They'll take in whatever they can for money. So it weakens our national defense in a number of different ways. We fund the terrorists through Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, as we discussed in Afghanistan. We have weakened borders because of these tunnels, because the drug dealers have unlimited money to create air-conditioned tunnels with train tracks and everything else. So we're never going to keep drugs out of this country. It's not going to happen. And now they're even growing them in our national parks.
You know what? I saw a piece on that.
Uh-huh.
It's actually
sure. So it's
sophisticated
unsafe
operation.
for you and your kids to take a walk in a national park, because if you happen to stumble into a pot grove, they'll shoot you. It's happened. In our parks, this drug war is a total, absolute fiasco. At some point, we need to talk about the catastrophic effects on children, because we are told that the drug war is for our children. This drug war kills and is devastating to children. We'll start with prenatally, because the moms are afraid if they're doing drugs to go to the OB to get prenatal medicine and prenatal care.
They'll probably get turned into child protective services.
You got it.
Yeah.
And so they either get turned in, or they can't keep their baby, or they go to prison. Whatever it is, they don't go. So this whole scare about 15 years ago on Newsweek, the crack babies, when they finally researched it wasn't the crack that was causing the problems. It was the lack of prenatal care. That was the big issue. So the problem starts for before the babies are born. All right? Then the babies are born, and Mom does a little pot, dad does a little coke, they go to prison, and the kids are put in foster care. So I just said to myself as a researcher, what happens to the kids in foster care? Predominantly black kids, by the way, and Hispanics. The kids in foster care have 4 times the death rate of kids who are left with their parents. 4 times. Now, if they happen to age out of foster care at age 18, if they happen to survive and age out, they don't have a family that cares about them. What happens? They become street people and doing drugs and alcohol. The very thing we were trying to prevent, we have in fact perpetuated.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a real sense of belonging.
Absolutely.
And that nurturing, that feeling of love.
That's right. Nobody cares about them, and so without that, you don't do well. My mother and father loved me to the day they passed away. My mother at 65, my father at 97. They never stopped loving me and caring about me. You got kids?
I do.
You'll never stop loving and caring about them.
Of course not.
That's right. But the kids that go into foster care because the parents did a little drug, their lives are doomed. Either they die or they end up alcoholics and street people and back in prison like their parents.
And you mentioned the term age out.
Yes.
For some of those who don't age out, they might end up in teen gangs.
Absolutely. Oh, teen gangs, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's another whole issue of how our drug war is catastrophic for kids. We have more teens in gangs than any other country in the world, and it's a deadly occupation. It's more dangerous to be in a teenage gang than it is to be in death row in Texas. They have a higher death rate, teenage gangs. Absolutely. That's right. But we keep being told by our politicians, we are fighting this war to protect our children. So here's another whole interesting aspect. I researched everything I could think of. Everybody talks about how terrible marijuana is. Marijuana is in a different category with all the other drugs and actually has some tremendous benefits. So this wonderful nurse by the name of Melanie Dreyer about 15 years ago went down to Jamaica, because in Jamaica, man, they love the ganja. They're smoking the pot whether they're pregnant or not pregnant. So she checked the babies of the pot smokers compared to the babies of the non-pot smokers to see if it was toxic and bad. Like alcohol is devastating. Alcohol causes fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a lifelong disabling, disfiguring, horrendous condition. These people are on welfare for life. They never can take care of themselves if they have any kind of serious condition, serious type of fetal alcohol syndrome. So she checks out the babies on ganja. And what did she find? After 30 days, the babies whose mother smoked pot focused better, ate better, and socialized better. They were already partying. She went back 10 and 15 years later, these kids were still doing better. The ones whose babies' mothers, furthermore, did pot when they were breastfeeding, which meant the babies were getting more pot, did even better than the ones whose mothers were not. So pot is not only beneficial to the babies, if it was used instead, and marijuana was the treatment of choice for alcoholism before marijuana became illegal in 1933. So if it was used for these women instead of alcohol, instead of having 1% of these babies that are a huge financial drain with fetal alcohol syndrome, we'd have healthy babies.
Initially, or in the beginning, why was marijuana made illegal?
It was done, it's probably for a lot of the same reasons. It was a racist decision by...
Let me share something with you.
Sure.
There was the textile industry is
Right.
huge worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the United States in that era. There were people in agriculture who knew that hemp/marijuana
Right.
is a very rugged, tough, durable weed plant, and that they could make this into clothing and other products.
Yep.
Well, the cotton industry, a lot of the other textile industries, recognized that and couldn't believe the threat that it posed.
That's right. And William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate who had all the trees for the papers, didn't want the competition either.
True.
That's part of it. And then it was the whole movie was fabricated by the alcohol industry, Reefer Madness, which showed a young 20-year-old guy smoking some pot and then killing people at her age, which is ridiculous. Pot makes you so mellow. All you want to do is slink over to the pizza and have a slice of pizza and an Oreo. Well, ding dong.
Yeah, I mean, maybe someone who's smoking pot might eat all your Doritos.
That could be the big thing. That could be the big crime right there. Excess, I think that's the title, is excess Dorito consumption. It's a felony 403.2. Excess Dorito consumption. By the way, if any of you listeners want to call in, we're happy to take calls and answer any questions they have.
No, the number here to call in is 702-888-0072. Again, 888-0072, area code 702. Call on in for
So
Mr. Frye?
there are a lot of reasons, but which the hemp thing that you point out is, and I have a whole chapter in my book on hemp. Hemp could have reduced our dependence on foreign oil years ago. Both Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. You remember those guys? They were kind of famous back in history. You know, they kind of had pretty good reputations back then.
They did have an impact.
Yeah, and they both said that hemp was key to the financial and independence future in the United States, and how right they were. We can grow hemp in almost all of our states, convert it into fuel, paper, wood, cosmetics. 25,000 different products are made out of hemp. Keeps our farmers busy. It's renewable. It's ecological because it takes carbon dioxide out of it.
Eco-friendly.
It reduces the carbon footprint and helps with global warming. So we are the only industrialized country in the world that cannot manufacture and process hemp. What a terrible thing for our country to do. And the reason we have that is because hemp is part of the same species of cannabis. Now, you can never get high on hemp, and you can't make paper and fuel out of marijuana. But because they're both part of cannabis species, we can't have it legal. And consequently, we have been dependent on foreign oil, go to war over oil, have $4 a gallon of gas and everything because we refuse to allow hemp to be grown and processed to the advantage of America.
Yeah, not to mention the devastation on air quality. We have a caller calling in.
Yes.
Yes. Hey, how are you doing? This is Patrick.
I'm doing wonderful. I just had a question. Has anybody covered the subject of how memory and marijuana, the effects on memory for long-term pot smokers or even short-term pot smokers?
Great question. Good question.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Patrick's pretending he lost his memory because he choked up the other day, you know. But we can't discuss that on the air because, you know, this is the United States.
Please, Dr. Frye, go ahead.
It's a great question, and I appreciate it. Everybody always talks about how terrible and dangerous marijuana is. It is the safest recreational, over-the-counter, or prescription drug in history. When I give talks to doctors and medical students, I say to them, anyone that can provide me documentation of one death from marijuana alone, I'll give them $50. I've never opened my wallet. In terms of the important question you raise about Alzheimer's and memory problem, there are actually a number of studies that show that marijuana protects the brain against Alzheimer's and is a very effective treatment for Alzheimer's. As a matter of fact, it has 4 times the anticholinesterase activity, as Aricept, one of the powerful Alzheimer's medications. So the idea that marijuana is going to screw up your brain is not only false, the reverse is true. Marijuana is a major brain beneficial drug. Proven beneficial for Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. It prevents and treats strokes. It prevents and treats Alzheimer's disease. And for veterans, let me say this, it's a documented, fabulous treatment for PTSD. And it's tremendous for chronic pain. And the VA just a few months ago said that VA doctors could provide prescriptions for marijuana for people with serious chronic pain. They haven't gotten around to giving it for PTSD yet, but it's documented to be fabulous for it, and someday hopefully the VA will recognize that. So in terms of marijuana being dangerous long-term, no. Now, when one is acutely intoxicated for the first few hours, I don't want you operating an airplane or operating on me. I don't even want to drive with you. However, the statistics are fabulous in showing that marijuana is safer to drive with than orange juice. And the reason for that is, and much, much safer than alcohol. Alcohol is catastrophic. When you drive on marijuana, it so slows you down that your speed is so slow that it more than compensates for the slight hand-eye discoordination that's created by the acute marijuana intoxication. So the answer to your question is marijuana is a remarkably safe drug. It's safer than aspirin and Tylenol because you can't die from it. In the United States, every year, 7,000 people die from aspirin or ibuprofen, and even more die from Tylenol. So it's remarkably safe. It certainly is a tremendous beneficial alternative to party with instead of alcohol, and human brains like to be intoxicated. That's just a fact of life.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for the call.
You mentioned that it has some positive effects on the brain.
Yes.
Not totally concurring with that.
Well,
it does kill brain cells.
No, wrong.
So
it prevents and treats Alzheimer's. So where do you get this idea that it kills brain cells?
Maybe it's just I've been indoctrinated by the media.
Oh, yes, you
It's
have.
been
That is exactly
The
right.
school system.
You have been told by the media that marijuana is addicting. It's a terrible addicting drug. That the new, more powerful marijuana that's been cultivated in the last few years is much more addicting. Well, that's all a lie, in fact. What happens is the new, more powerful drugs means that you get high on 3 puffs instead of 5 puffs. It's still not addicting. A tiny percentage of people get what we call a psychological dependence on marijuana, which is relatively easy to treat. What's much worse to people is when you put them in prison for smoking marijuana and destroy their lives. That's a much more we're always looking at the lesser of two evils. Mm-hmm. The lesser of two evils is legalization. And again, I'm not a proponent of drug use. I'm a proponent of minimizing drug use. Legalization minimizes drug use. You put someone in prison, 1/3 of prisoners are dead by age 45. 2/3 are rearrested within 3 years. So in essence, the maximum benefit we get out of putting someone in prison for a simple drug possession is they rehabilitate them for 3 years. 1/3 of prisoners are dead by age 45. Now remember, we just talked about how you can't die from pot directly, pharmacologically. Now you can die from pot in a drug bust. If the DEA decides to come, it happened here in Las Vegas a few months ago. A guy was shot in his bathroom by the DEA because they thought he had marijuana. That's not a pharmacological death. That's a drug war death. And the drug war kills far more people than drugs. That one fact alone should be enough to end the drug war. If I told you that having a prostate exam was more likely to kill you than prostate cancer, you wouldn't have a prostate exam. The drug war kills far more people than drugs.
Well, the advertisements constantly running on TV are for all kinds of drugs to help this, to help that.
Those I differentiate by calling those medications as opposed to drugs.
Well, the FDA approves them.
That's correct. That is correct.
Therefore, they're safe. It's okay for you to consume these products.
Right.
But the side effects from some of these
are
pharmaceutical...
Marijuana is so much safer than the opiates that we take people off all the time. Marijuana is safer than Vicodin, safer than Lortab, safer than Percocet. It's much, much safer. You can't die from it. You can't get addicted to it. Marijuana is an incredible pain medication. That's how I first got interested in this whole thing in the 90s in California. Medical marijuana was legal. And so the surgeons would come up to me Friday at the grand rounds at the hospital and say, Steve, we got these failed operation patients. Every orthopedic surgeon and every nerve surgeon has failed back patients. They've operated 2 or 3 or 4 times. The patient still has pain. They can't do anything else. They don't want to sit and meet with them every month to write the prescription because they're surgeons. They want to operate. So I say to me, Steve, will you take these patients? I said, sure, send them over. We'll see what we can do. Well, I did the research on marijuana, and lo and behold, this stuff is safe. Safer than anything I can write with my prescription pad.
Yeah, so, but to smoke is not a real pleasant experience.
Most people don't mind. You can also make marijuana brownies, marijuana spaghetti. You can cook it up any way you want. But it doesn't cause lung cancer or anything at all. Absolutely, positively not. That's another one of the great myths. It causes lung cancer? No, not only does it not cause lung cancer. Dr. David Melamed at the University of Colorado Medical School, he did a great study where he compared smokers to smokers who also used pot to those that did nothing. And the smokers that also used pot had less lung cancer than those that just smoked alone. So actually, marijuana is carcinoprotective. It actually protects a little bit against cancer. And being on marijuana alone, no increase in cancer. So it's just another one of those lies that's been around forever.
Yeah, one of your chapters mentions the devastating impact on women. Mm-hmm. I know you touched on it earlier about if a woman is pregnant and she's been smoking marijuana, if she goes to the local clinic or whatever, they would have to report her over to
We have, in the United States, we have more women in prison than any other country in the world. Now, does that mean that we have a bunch of immoral, criminal, terrible women in this country, or does that mean that our laws are just very, very wrong, Patrick? Women are arrested, furthermore, for ancillary reasons. They're not even usually arrested selling drugs and using drugs. This is what typical story is. The guy drug dealer's out doing a dealer and doing a deal, and the police heard about him via a snitch or something. So they go to his apartment to try to arrest him. Well, he's out doing a deal. There's drugs hidden in the top back of the closet she doesn't even know about. But the cops go in, they got a search warrant, they search the house, she's there. Guess who's going to prison? Because we get paid to get people. We're getting another druggie off the street. She didn't even know it was there, but because she's living with the old man, and she did know he was selling drugs, she just didn't know they were in the house, she's now going to prison. She's got nothing to offer up in a plea bargain. She doesn't know who the up-the-line guy is. Like the drug dealer himself may say, well, I'll wear a wire and I'll give you my dealer who's selling to me and get a reduced sentence. She's got nothing. So she goes to prison just for being in the house with the dealer. It's incredible the kind of ridiculous things women go to prison for. She goes to the doctor and tells the doctor, she's trying to be honest with the doctor. She's pregnant. I've been doing a little drugs. Well, bingo, the doctor calls, and she's going to prison until the baby's born and whatever. I mean, the women are not the criminals in our society. But they go into prison, and we have more women in prison than any other country in the world.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that the racism worse than slavery.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yes. I wrote that chapter, and I had the chairman of the history department. I was writing this up in Reno at the Truckee Meadows Community College, and I had the chairman of the history department read that chapter to make sure that I wasn't exaggerating and misstating the case.
This is at UNR?
This is Truckee Meadows Community College.
Oh, Truckee Meadows. Okay.
Meadows, PhD professor of the history department. And basically, and I'm absolutely against slavery, no question about that. It was totally immoral. But the slave owner, for all the wrong reasons, took good care of the slave. If the slave wasn't healthy and the slave couldn't pick the cotton, the slave owner had made a bad business investment. So slavery is immoral, but the slave owner took care of the slave. If the slave got sold, he sold the whole family together. If the slave had teenage kids, the teenage kids went to the field and they helped to pick the cotton, so he had a good business investment. Now, so that's the story of blacks during the time of slavery. Slavery was wrong, but the blacks were treated well. There were a few cases where they were whipped and beaten, but remarkably few. I went through the history. Very few deaths were caused by slavery. All right? Now, we come to the modern time. What happens to the blacks in modern time? Well, we started already. Dad smokes a little, uses a little coke. Mom smokes a little pot. They go to prison. Kids go to foster care. We already talked about that. So we have more blacks in prison now than in college.
Yeah, that's a stat.
That's an absolute statistic. More blacks in prison than in college. And if we destroy the black family, we do more damage to the African-American family today is more damaged by the drug war than black families were during slavery. We solved the slavery problem. It's the biggest racial issue in America today as far as I'm concerned, and I'm having trouble convincing black organizations, the NAACP and the Urban League, that they've been so brainwashed that the drug war is protecting them instead of devastating them, that I'm slowly starting to educate them to take a look at this and come out against the drug war, because the people that are paying the biggest price are African-American families.
Well, and regardless of their titles and what their mission statement says, it's not necessarily their agenda. It's used more of as a political machine, more pundit-like at this point. But I'm glad you mentioned that. And there's actually, on a global scale, there's actually 27 million people in slavery today. On a global scale.
Okay.
A lot of that is directly linked to drug trade.
I have not researched that. Which countries are those in, Patrick?
Globally. A lot of it's in Asia. Of course, a lot of them are sexually exploited, but Asia.
Okay, well, I just reviewed the United States and what's going on in this country. Otherwise, I could never get this book done. As it is, it took 3.5 years full-time of my retirement sitting in the library and researching to get what I've got. And what I've got is overwhelming. I'm sure there are other factors that would further enhance the argument for legalization, but what I've got is overwhelming as it is.
Yeah, something else I found really interesting here is global warming powerhouse wasted.
That's hemp. Hemp is a global warming powerhouse that we have wasted by making it illegal in this country. We should have hemp fuel in every gas station. You should be able to wear a hemp shirt. I should be able to buy hemp shaving lotion. You should be able to get your wife hemp cologne for Christmas. 25,000 different products, including the major ones: fuel, paper, and wood. Incredible.
Yeah. So the fuel is that a high octane
Biofuel.
fuel? Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember. I didn't. didn't review that. I just know that it's used with great success.
And you mentioned here that even animals get high?
Yeah, I'm glad you caught that, Patrick. Yes. So,
I could just see my cat jumping from...
Catnip? Doesn't your cat like catnip?
Yeah, my cat likes... She likes greenies and catnip.
All right, so I said to myself, is it just people whose brains like to be intoxicated, or is it throughout the animal kingdom? So to document that we're never going to get to zero, I put that chapter in there called Even Animals Get High. And throughout the animal kingdom, from ants to elephants, brains love to be intoxicated. So we are never going to get people down to zero. So then the question becomes, how do we get the minimum drug use with the minimum medical damage? That's called harm reduction. That's what that whole field is called, harm reduction. In alcoholism, the whole concept of a designated driver is harm reduction. If some people are going to drink, let's have somebody else drive them home so we don't have an accident and nobody gets killed. That's harm reduction. So ants, there's a species of ant that it lives with beetles, and it loves the secretions on the beetle's abdomen so much, makes it high, that given a choice between feeding and fending for its own baby ants and getting high on the beetle secretion, it'll get high on the beetle secretion and let their own babies die, which in some ways is what happens with women addicts. Women addicts have given up their kids in order to maintain their highs. Okay? Now you go all the way up the scale. I've got a half a dozen different examples. The elephants. An elephant will run 10 kilometers or 6 miles to get a fermented peach. A fermented peach has alcohol. It's sat on the branch long enough that it's turned to some alcohol. He'll run 6 miles to get a fermented peach when there's a regular peach right next to him on the tree. So brains love to be intoxicated. We're never going to get down to zero to drug use. The answer is, how do we get to the minimum drug use with the minimum personal harm and societal harm? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally documented and proven regulation, taxation, and control, or legalization.
That's funny you mention elephants, because elephants have a keen memory.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep, and brains love to be intoxicated. Human brains love to be intoxicated. How many people go out on a Friday night, and alcohol is documented to reduce stress? How many people go out on a Friday night, and our lovely board lady here is raising her hands, and have a drink or two to reduce the stress and settle down for the weekend? That's very, very common. You ask every bar in America which is the busiest night in the week, and they'll tell you Friday and Saturday nights.
Sure.
Exactly.
Sure, any prior to holiday or something.
That's exactly
right. Well, that's really interesting, Dr. Frye. You also, on an economic topic, $1 trillion plus squandered.
We have wasted in the last 30 years in this country on the drug war more than $1 trillion building prisons, funding prisons, courts to send people to prison, probation office. Oh, that reminds me. Let me tell you the fabulous story about Switzerland. But $1 trillion is what we have conservatively wasted on the drug war. Because no one can tell you with a straight face that we are winning, or we have won, or we can never win. That's been overwhelmingly documented by the fact that with 5% of the world's population, we use 60% of the world's drugs, despite having more people in prison than China or any other country in the world. So here's the Switzerland story, okay? Switzerland decided 5 years ago to give their worst hardcore methadone-resistant heroin addicts free heroin and free needles. They say, it's cheaper than the police arresting him, it's cheaper than the judges prosecuting him, it's cheaper than the guards in prison guarding him, it's cheaper than the probation officers following up when they get done. Let's just try and see what happens.
Probably the medical attention for AIDS as well.
Or AIDS goes way down when you legalize it. Hepatitis goes way down.
Clean needles.
All that stuff. And it's been found also in Portugal. When you legalized our AIDS in the Netherlands in newborn babies no longer exists.
Really?
That's correct. We still have it in this country.
And Amsterdam or Holland itself has legalized prostitution.
That's correct.
Netherlands, Holland.
That's correct. But the issue of the AIDS is more the drugs than the prostitution. But they do wear condoms and they require safe. Exactly. So what happens when Switzerland decides to give these worst? Now these are the worst heroin addicts. They've failed methadone. What happens? And they got to show up every day to get the heroin. It's not like the doc gives them a prescription, they come back in a month. So we have phenomenal statistics. After 4 years, 80% of these hardcore, lifelong heroin addicts cleaned up their act.
80%?
84 out of 5.
That's a remarkable recovery rate.
2
Dr.
years
Frye.
ago. That's exactly right. It's remarkable. It shows how safe clean heroin is. That's what that shows. 2 years ago, when we elected Barack Obama, the Swiss people, by a 2/3 majority, voted to make this a permanent program in their country, that any treatment-resistant heroin addict will get free needles and free heroin as long as they need it. And when they no longer have to commit crime to get it, they can clean up their acts, they can get a job, they can get on with their lives. So this idea that free drugs is going to result in more drug use is absolutely, positively a lie, Patrick. Let's give that number one more time,
888-0072. Call in to speak to Dr. Stephen Frye, author of 25 Reasons to Legalize Drugs. We Really Lost the War. That is 702-888-0072.
Thanks.
Speak to Dr. Stephen Frye.
So these are the facts of the benefits of legalization and the catastrophic failure with the implications of our drug policy.
Yeah. You know what? I'm a constitutionalist, and one of your chapters touches on the erosion of our Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
Would you please elaborate on that, Dr. Frye?
Sure. It's the slippery slope of there have been more wiretaps with marginal justification for drug dealers than anything else.
Which is a violation of our Fourth Amendment, which most Americans have.
And then we've got forfeited assets. So if you are arrested as a drug dealer and you happen to have a fancy house and a fancy car and a nice boat and maybe a little small Cessna, they'll come in and confiscate all that stuff even though you have not been found guilty. That's all confiscated because the assumption is you've been arrested, you're a drug dealer, we're going to take all that stuff.
So that's seized.
Seized.
Illegally searched and seized.
Forfeited assets. Yes. And then there's a bunch of whole other examples in there. Police lie so much on the stand to put away a drug dealer without proper documentation and justification. It's called test-a-lying instead of testifying.
Test-a-lying.
That's what it's called, test-a-lying. And the police do it all the time, maintains their job, gets them statistics about drug arrests so they get more federal money. And so there's those are just other examples of the tentacles of the failure of the drug war and what it has done to our society.
Yeah, we had a lot of troops coming back from Vietnam who became drug addicts.
Correct.
And I would assume the same for the Iraqi and Afghanistan wars.
Mm-hmm. Less in Iraq and Afghanistan than in Vietnam because there was more available in the fields of Vietnam and stuff. Iraq is more an urban war. Vietnam was more of a rural war. Less, but certainly some. And what we know is we've got treatment. The only thing that has ever reduced drug use and drug demand is treatment. We have fabulous treatment for all kinds of drug addictions. Yeah. All kinds.
Now, Dr. Frye, what about the moral, ethical issue of drug use?
Yes, what about it?
Do you want to pollute your temple, with the drugs?
The temple of my mind?
The temple of your soul. I mean, I don't use drugs. I don't really associate with anybody who does.
Okay.
A lot of winos out there.
Okay.
I don't really want anyone really close to me using drugs either.
I'm not a proponent of drug use. Now let me ask you the moral question. Is it better to allow someone to self-intoxicate and do whatever they want with their own brain and their own body, or should we put them in prison and destroy their life? Which is more immoral?
The latter.
There you go. We're always dealing with the lesser of two evils in this world. There is very few instances of perfection. We're dealing with the lesser of two evils. And regulation, taxation, and control, or legalization, as I call it, is far, far less toxic and immoral and dangerous and deadly to everybody involved than drugs. Are drugs perfect? No. Do I want people to do drugs? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't want my kids or really anyone I love.
Let me guarantee you I will guarantee you that if your kids or grandchildren ever become drug addicts, it's not going to be because you said or did anything to encourage it. It's going to be because some drug dealer gave them samples and got them hooked. And as long as we have illegal drugs, we'll have drug dealers. By the way, we've got 1 million teenagers selling drugs in America today.
Where did you get that statistic?
Normal, National Organization Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Okay.
Well documented. And in terms of high school dropouts, in our 10 biggest cities, the high school dropout rate is 50%, USA Today. In 3 cities, New York, Baltimore, and Detroit, the high school dropout rate was 60%. That got me thinking, what do those 3 cities have in common? They all have big drug problems. So I said, gee, I wonder what the high school dropout rate is in the Netherlands, where those terrible drugs are regulated and controlled and legalized. The dropout rate in the Netherlands is 8%. That's no child left behind. And as long as we have illegal drugs and teenagers can make money selling pot and drugs on the street, why should they graduate from high school? So you want to increase high school graduation rates? Regulate, tax, and control the drugs. Teenagers will stay in school. They'll be using less drugs because there's nobody pushing them on them. And even if they want to buy them, they won't be able to. It's easier for a teenager to buy pot in the United States than it is for them to buy cigarettes or alcohol because those are controlled.
Right. You got to actually go to the
You've got to go to a store, and you see the alcohol dealer doesn't want to lose his license. So when you go into the liquor store to buy a bottle of something, he's checking your ID real closely. You go to the drug dealer, all you got to have is some Benjamins. He doesn't care how old you are.
Yeah, in the Netherlands, I don't want people to have a misconception of the Hollanders or the Dutch. Mm-hmm. They're not all sitting around saying, we love drugs, yay, let's let everybody do drugs. This is, in their perspective and in their execution,
we have 5
it's
times.
contained.
Not only is it contained, you'll never see anybody shooting up on the street or anything. You'll never walk down the street and have anybody say to you, if you're in any big city in America and you walk down the major tourist areas, somebody on the corner is going to be standing there giving you the look like you want to buy, or he's going to say to you, need anything, under his breath. I've had it happen to me 12 times. Need anything? I know what he's talking about. In the Netherlands, that's never going to happen because you can buy the stuff in the store legitimately, so there's nobody on the corner saying, need anything? And our drug use is 5 times higher than theirs.
The vast majority of the drug use is contained in areas in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, The Hague. It's not like the whole out in the
we have 5 times as much in this country. Now we have 5 times as much drug use despite having 6 times as many people in prison per 100,000 and despite having 4 times their murder rate per 100,000. But what's much worse, our teenage murder rate. Our teenage murder rate is 19 times higher than the Netherlands. But wait a minute. We're told that we waged this war to protect our teenagers and our children. That's what the politicians tell us. Well, then please explain to me how we have 19 times the murder rate. You get rid of the drug war, that murder rate goes down to what the other countries have.
So tell me, Dr. Frye, if you are to be elected to Senate, what would be your first move to help resolve this great problem we have in
my goal during the next 2 years is to have an opportunity to talk to good people like you and the people of Nevada, to let them know what a catastrophic failure the drug war is, what a financial drain it is on our economy. Both California and Nevada have been bankrupted by our prison system. It costs more for a prison guard with a high school degree or a GED. They make $50,000. A PhD professor at the University of Nevada starts at $47,500. And that's 1 shift a day of professor and 3 shifts a day of prison guards. No wonder the prison guards in California donate millions of dollars to have it defeated. That's job security for them.
Sure.
High-priced jobs with no skill. Yeah. You don't have to have a college degree to be a prison guard.
They make more than our school teachers.
Absolutely.
School teachers.
They make more than the school teachers, and they make more than the PhD professors. So a significant factor in contributing to the devastating financial condition of both California and Nevada is our prisons. I was standing in line getting a pizza the other night at a local casino, and the guy behind me, we've had a long line, so we're talking for a while, and I mentioned about the book and stuff, and he says to me, I was working in an engineering office, and it costs a lot more money to build a prison than it does a school. I said, I hadn't thought about it, but you were right. He said to me, prisons got to have thick walls, they got to have these gauge doors between everybody. They've got to have all kinds of specialty equipment. He says it costs so much more to build a prison than a school, you wouldn't believe it. I said, it makes perfect sense to me. A classroom is just four walls, a window, and a radiator, and an air conditioner.
Yeah, think of all the scholarships.
Everything. The prisons are a catastrophic failure. We can't even keep drugs out of prison. It kills people. A third of prisoners are dead by age 45. 2/3 are rearrested within 3 years. Prison is a life-changing, catastrophic failure that contributes to our drug epidemic, because when people get out, all they can do is sell drugs.
So, say you get into the Senate. Mm-hmm. How do you convince the other 534 members, actually 536 now, the others, to see
I think that when they realize Prohibition ended in 1933, 3 years after the Great Depression, it wasn't as if all of a sudden the Women's Christian Temperance Union thought it was a good idea to legalize drugs. It was because the United States couldn't afford it anymore, and they realized prohibition wasn't working. We had huge crime under Al Capone. Alcohol was available every place. We have huge crime now. Drugs are available every place. So it's going to be up to the Congress of the United States to realize that this is a failure. They realized that slavery was a failure. They changed the law. They realized that women needed the right to vote. They changed the law. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. It's my hope that as a physician and a former medical school professor, that people will listen to me and pay attention. And if they have an argument that I'm wrong, please bring it up. But nobody has an argument that I'm wrong anymore. We haven't had one caller call in and say, this guy is wrong. It doesn't happen.
Some of the local levels, like for instance, Oakland and San Francisco, are creating these like free zones for their...
Many cities now have, and I'm going to introduce that in Las Vegas, they have what's called lowest police priority, which means that the police make it their lowest priority to go after pot smokers. It's not legal, but they're going to spend their time doing legitimate crimes and chasing down rapists and murderers and arsonists and robberies and everything else.
Those who should be behind bars.
That's exactly right. And they leave. So we're going to introduce in the next couple of months to Las Vegas, making it a lowest police priority.
Okay. Again, we are with Dr. Stephen Frye, running for U.S. Senate in 2012. He is the author of 25 Reasons to Legalize Drugs. We Lost This War. Dr. Frye, please give us your contact information.
Actually, the book is all sold out. We're doing a redo. The website is 25reasons.org, so people can go to the website and read a few of the pages, but you can't order the book right now. We're doing a reorder. We sold out, and the next time we'll have a bigger push, so it'll be more widely available. I do want to wish all of our veterans a belated Happy Veterans Day and thank them for their service. I myself am a former Special Forces physician, so I was in the Army Special Forces myself.
Good man.
And I thank you very much, and thank you very much, Patrick, for the pleasure of being with you today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.